I finally got to watch The Shivering Truth, and now I'm going to talk about it. This is a show from Vernon Chapman, one of the fellows behind Wonder Chosen, which was still very hip when I was in college, so that's when I kind of familiarized myself with his work, and generally, he makes weird stuff. You might hate this show, and even if you enjoy it, it might be for completely different reasons than my own. I just cannot talk about this show using the usual tools of media criticism. That would be like trying to fix a snowplow with melted chocolate. Structure, character development, pacing, all of these components are technically present in The Shivering Truth, but none of them even get close to conventional execution. This show probably doesn't have the same goals as most contemporary entertainment. I do think it has some kind of intentions, I think, but I'm going to talk about the show from a much looser perspective. We need to talk about art for a little while, and that's just as exhausting as it sounds. In different artistic mediums throughout history, there is a pretty consistent push and pull between minimalism and maximalism. We can see it in music, especially Western music. I don't know enough about art history, so I can't speak to that one, but it's definitely true in literature as well, though we could also make the argument that the second half of the 20th century fragmented experience in a certain way, also fragmenting artistic influence and creation. So we currently have both of these types, both of these styles or approaches operating simultaneously. But the reason I bring this up is because I think, in a similar fashion, there has been a kind of vacillation between messaging of meaning and non-meaning in art. If we really wanted to, we could pick up various artistic and aesthetic movements. Are those technically different things? I'm not sure. And we could place them in one of these categories or the other. So we have nihilism over here, absurdism, Dadaism probably. We have protest music of the 60s over here on the side of meaning, conscious rap. I'll put postmodernism over here until someone explains why it actually belongs on the other side. Mainstream entertainment almost always stays on this side of the fence, the side of meaning, even if it doesn't feel genuine in its belief. So popular entertainment tends to reinforce master plots that whole cultures tend to agree upon. One of our favorite master plots here in the US is that if you work hard enough, you can achieve anything, regardless of whether it's true, which it's not. It's a prevailing master plot, and so much of our popular entertainment reiterates this basic arc, reinforcing this idea as true and valuable, even if only unintentionally. Similarly, we could talk about the tired old hero's journey structure and how it reinforces an imagined ideal of rugged individualism. These master plots are all over the place, but I wanted to highlight this wide gap in messaging because the stuff on this side of the fence often feels like it exists in opposition to the ideas being conveyed by the other side and vice versa. So even when art of non-meaning and art of meaning address the exact same subjects, they will arrive at very different outcomes. And the natural outcomes belonging to art of non-meaning are much more difficult to confront and or accept compared to the outcomes of art of meaning. And that's regardless of which ones you happen to actually believe and subscribe to in your real life. The messaging of art of non-meaning is inherently uncomfortable and unsavory. Let's take a subject like death, which is a foundational topic in The Shivering Truth. Art of meaning looks at death and says, death is an affirming conclusion to life, and since life is of value, death is also has its own sort of value. Loved ones reflect on that person's significance and their contributions, and even if the deceased was a terrible person, death can be a catalyst for the growth and development of the bereaved. Art of non-meaning looks at death and says, death is just as unimportant as life. It means nothing, and we all have to live with the knowledge that upon death, we will be even less valuable than we are now. And if I haven't made this clear, these are extremely broad generalizations. It's the idea of meaning versus the idea of non-meaning in their most simple forms. But I think the typically negative response to art of non-meaning is closely related to the visceral discomfort of engaging with it in any way.
Chaos reigns.
There's also a stigma around art of non-meaning based on its association with like gothy teenagers maybe, or like art school students, for example. And it's not too surprising, I guess, that the association exists, because to young artists looking to rebel and break new ground, art of non-meaning appears very subversive and cool and art. They start reading Camus and getting into experimental theater. And yeah, I may or may not have some firsthand experience with this, but even if you never went to art school or were around that kind of environment, you're probably familiar with the specific flavor of naive, ill-conceived, supposedly subversive art that has zero subtlety.
Shocking art supply and craft. Smash TV. Baby doll parts. What does that say about our society?
Even recently, you have the society meme. As soon as someone starts trying to talk about, I don't know, social class or politics or corruption, it's very easy to shrug off those comments as childish or as an act of image with no real sincerity behind it. But this is kind of a problem in the larger scheme, because yeah, we do need to talk about major social issues. We do need to talk about the human condition and wonder about the role of human life in the universe. I think that's all positive, ultimately. And so as a result of this weird stigma and negative association, artists who want to address these kinds of very large topics in their work, they need to find a way to do that without being immediately dismissed. And at least for me, this challenge results in a back and forth of genuine creative excitement and a total overwhelming concern of how this work will be viewed by others based on current trends and, contemporary views of the central topics. So while watching The Shivering Truth, I was doing something you generally shouldn't do, internally speculating about the intentions of the artists and their level of self-awareness as they were making the show. There were these opposing forces in the show. Some of them seemed to be making a case for the artists being extremely savvy and knowing exactly how to talk about all this stuff without coming off as cringy, and other traits seemed to communicate that the artists never gave a thought to how this would all be seen by the audience, that they just couldn't care less whether it seemed pretentious. And the most shocking part of all of this is that it works. It's not pretentious. It does provide some interesting reflections on these massive themes like love and death and birth and pain and power and suicide and religion. Mostly. It was mostly successful in this way, or it was successful most of the time, something like that. I would probably call this a sketch dramedy sci-fi show. It seems to have some influence from weird fiction, which is a subgenre that's difficult to describe, but it's sort of like magical realism that tends to be a bit darker. And I'm definitely biased on this front because I really like that kind of stuff. In fact, I've written that kind of stuff, or at least I used to, a lot more often when I was a little younger. And I don't know. I mean, I would have loved to work on this show in some capacity, but I guess I missed my window. But at the same time, I know that not everyone shares my tastes. I know that not everyone is a sucker for this kind of entertainment. And I did look around online just a bit to see what people were saying about the show, and it seems like the people who say nice things about The Shivering Truth are maybe the type who are very proud to be seen liking a media property that's so surface level gross and extreme, and that's fine. I've been there. But if you spend enough time seeking out weird media, you'll probably reach a point of saturation. Eventually, you're no longer impressed by the balls out insanity, and you start asking why the artist chose to execute this crazy vision at all. Is there a point? And no, there doesn't have to be a point, especially if you call yourself like an absurdist or a Dadaist. I don't think anyone uses that label anymore. And this brings us back to the stigma of bad experimental work made by art school kids just trying to freak people out with crazy art and not much else. There's even a temptation to think that experimental work is just incredibly low effort, like there wasn't a lot of thought that went into it at all. Plus, sometimes experimental work is just plain bad. Sometimes it is really low effort and doesn't really have impact. But when done well, it can be valuable too, which is why I want to represent experimental work like The Shivering Truth as much more than just its cursory abrasiveness. In the YouTube economy, it's really only worth its weight in reaction videos and screeching thumbnails, but in real life, where people live, it has more value than that, at least to me. Enjoying that abrasiveness is fine, especially for younger viewers who are kind of trying art of non-meaning on for size, maybe for the first time, but there's more here. That's all I'm saying. At the same time, I'm really going back and forth here. I was not on board completely throughout the show. There were plenty of moments where the show just felt painfully Adult Swim, like circa 2005, and even though specific story points are often unpredictable, mostly, the story flow in each episode is very similar. The writing does feel very stream of consciousness, but I think that stream of consciousness connections function differently based on the brain in question. So, for example, someone who's focused a lot on language in the written word might form rapid-fire connections based on lingual similarities, connections based on words, associations of the meanings of words, while, on the other hand, someone who's more visually minded might make more visually based connections, visual rhyming, similar shapes and structures. The show's visual and storytelling flow is excellent to me. Transitions of either the visuals or the storytelling from one idea to the next, they can be jarring, and the pacing is just too much sometimes, leading to a sense of overstimulation, feeling kind of like anxiety or a stress stream, but the connections are still there, and it's easy to pay attention to the next insane plot point or image when they arrive. I did feel that at times there were just too many ideas crammed in too quickly in too small a space, but that sensation might fade on future rewatches, though I'd really have to be in the right mood to watch this again anytime soon. And not only that, but going from this show to normal life or normal TV shows is dramatic. It reminds me of a section of The Screwtape Letters, which is a pretty good book about a demon's attempts to ruin someone's life. And it's good despite Lewis's aggressive Christian messaging throughout. But anyway, in this particular section, the demon's human charge is in the library or someplace reading a book and really engaging in some high-level thought about very abstract concepts, very big topics. But later on, in one of his letters, the demon congratulates himself for halting this progress by reminding the man that he's still a person with responsibilities who has to go and eat lunch and get back to work.